Discretion is advised.
In an interview hosted by Tucker Carlson with guest Mike Huckabee, the United States ambassador to Israel and Christian pastor, Tucker asks if Israel's prime minister admitted to genocidal intentions by calling Hamas Amalek after Hamas unalived children and women civilians during the October 7th massacre. Taking issue with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu calling enemies who wish Israel harm by the name Amalek, is also currently being condemned with the war in Iran. So let's listen to Tucker ask his question because it's a good question, and then we will address the past and current statements.
It's a different question, and I want to refer you very specifically to a number of speeches the Prime Minister, your friend Benjamin Netanyahu, gave in the aftermath of October 7th, including one in November of that year, when he referred to Amalek.
It was actually at the end of October. It was not in November of 2023 that these statements were made, and Tucker is taking his entire interpretation from a video published by the Middle East Eye. Here, take a look.
You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible. And we do remember, and we are fighting our brave troops and combatants who are now in Gaza or around Gaza and in all other regions in Israel are joining this chain of Jewish heroes, a chain that has started 3,000 years ago from Joshua ben Nun until the heroes of 1948, the Six-Day War, the 73 October War, and all other wars in this country. Our hero troops, they have one supreme main goal: to completely defeat the murderous enemy and to guarantee our existence in this country. We've always said, never again. Never again is now.
The Middle East Eye then begins to play ominous music as they point out 1 Samuel chapter 15. Since Amalek is mentioned throughout the Torah, it's interesting that it's 1 Samuel that they point out, and that's exactly what Tucker Carlson points out as well.
Amalek. Now, Amalek is a reference, a biblical reference. Of course, you'll be very familiar with that. The Amalekites were a tribe described throughout the Bible, particularly in 1 Samuel, that obstructed the Jews as they fled Egypt. And God tells Samuel to give the instructions to Saul to kill the Amalekites. And he says, and I'm sure you remember this is in 1 Samuel 15, of course, I know you know it. He says, kill the men, kill the women, kill the children, kill the infants, kill the donkeys, kill the camels, kill everything. And Saul spares the king and he spares the animals. And for that, he is punished by God. That is genocide. God is calling for genocide of the Amalekites, of Amalek. And the prime minister of Israel, at least once, I believe on other occasions, described the Palestinians in Gaza as Amalek. That's calling for genocide. And you know that.
Notice how Tucker Carlson changes Benjamin Netanyahu's actual statement. He says that Bibi is calling for the genocide of the Palestinians in Gaza, not Hamas. So let's take what Benjamin said and what Tucker said and put them back to back.
To completely defeat the murderous enemy and to guarantee our existence in this country. We've always said, never again.
Described the Palestinians in Gaza as Amalek. That's calling for genocide.
And as you could see, he never said the Palestinians in Gaza. He said the murderous enemy, which is Hamas. But let's let him finish now.
I totally disagree.
Tell me then what it means.
Because to say that Israel was attempting to commit genocide, first of all, that's simply not true.
I'm saying, what is the prime minister talking about? Why would he refer to the Palestinians as Amalek? What is Amalek?
You would have to ask him. I don't know. I know what Amalek is. I do understand 1 Samuel 16. I get all
15.
that.
1 Samuel 15.
But I do understand.
And it's widely known. So if you say our enemy is Amalek and we are proceeding on the basis of God's commands to us, you are calling for genocide. Tell me how I'm missing.
Tucker Carlson reasons that since God instructed King Saul to commit a genocide against the nation of Amalek in 1 Samuel 15, then clearly identifying one as Amalek expresses the desire to commit genocide. But not just any genocide such as against Hamas, but against all Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Mike Huckabee immediately rejects any interpretation of Bibi's words as admitting to genocidal intent. It was also clear that Pastor Huckabee was not prepared to answer this question fully. Naturally, Tucker Carlson wants to understand how else to understand Bibi's statement from a biblical perspective. If it does not mean genocide, then what does it mean? Unfortunately, there was no answer given from a theological lens. Now, while I don't like Tucker Carlson, his question was actually a good question that has a solid answer, and the ability to answer these questions and understand Amalek is indeed very important. So I'm going to answer Tucker's question and hopefully bring some clarity for the sake of goodness. So let's circle back to his question. Is there another way to understand what it means to call a person or group Amalek without genocide as the implied solution? The answer is yes and no, so let me explain. There's the technical, metaphorical, and psychological aspects involved with who Amalek is and how we approach it. From a technical and legal biblical perspective, there is no physical nation of Amalek today. Therefore, the specific command that God gave to King Saul cannot be carried out. But let's explain Amalek's origins and how we even got to this point. Amalek is the result of growing up in radical hatred. He was born into family drama. There were twin brothers, Jacob and Esau, and Amalek descends from Esau. Esau declared Israel, Jacob, his sworn enemy. So now Amalek, a descendant of Esau, learned to hate what his family hated. This hatred is akin to any radical ideology that denies the ability for peace between future generations. And we see a lot of that today between Gaza, West Bank, and those who reside in Israel.
On average, 18 Palestinians die every week in clashes with the Israelis. A martyr is someone who dies for his or her faith. The glorification of the fallen is so pervasive, even mothers seem to embrace it. In some families, anger at the occupation is so great, mothers seem to be pushing their children to die by murder-suicide.
Now, while Amalek was an individual, and so was Jacob, also known as Israel, they were both individuals, both of them eventually became nations. And since the hatred Amalekites carried was just the extension of their ancestors' personal feud, there never needed to be current disputes about anything for the continued hatred to keep going. No legitimate disputes were needed. Entirely made-up ones could be used. All you needed to do to be a target of the Amalekites was be a descendant of Jacob. So, for the Amalekites, the intoxication of pure hate was now a part of their collective psychological framework. Now that we know where the family feud originally began between two individuals, let's talk about when the feud actually carried out its first attack as nations. Amalek was the first to attack Israel after they left Egypt. But why? Well, again, Amalek doesn't need a reason. It's now who they are as a people. Additionally, Amalek doesn't play fair either. They went for the weakest, the stragglers, those completely exhausted from the Exodus who were falling behind. Now, you would think that Amalek would be hesitant in attacking Israel after the 10 plagues that just ravaged Egypt, but they didn't care what God had just done, because venomous hatred blinds. When hatred is passed down generationally, it consumes the mind and leaves one with tunnel vision. In other words, you simply cannot reason with a madman who has been created over generations to simply hate you for no reason. So, while Amalek as a physical nation existed, no one was safe. The question was never if Amalek would strike, but rather the question was when Amalek would strike. So, the failure to completely destroy the nation of Amalek allowed the unmitigated hatred, the ingrained hatred towards Israel to continue existing, except now this time it was cloaked. It couldn't be easily identified because the physical nation itself no longer existed. But survivors of that nation did continue to exist, and the remaining survivors of Amalek simply assimilated into different nations. And from time to time, you could see this ancient and radical hate re-emerge in our world. For example, Haman, a descendant of Amalek, emerges in the book of Esther. Now, Haman himself was not a nation, but it was easy to identify where he came from and his radical hatred. But what about more modern examples? Well, it's not hard to identify where the descendants of Amalek are today. All you have to do is see who hates the Jewish people so badly that they are blinded by it. We saw this hatred with the Nazi regime, and again today with Hamas and the Ayatollah in Iran, who is now deceased. So when Benjamin Netanyahu rightfully identifies Hamas as Amalek, he is simply pointing out their unmitigated hatred. And that type of unmitigated hatred is the same hatred that allowed Hamas to unalive 2 babies with their bare hands. And see, their supporters call it a quote-unquote resistance. It's a name given to identify any person or group that wishes to see the destruction of the nation of Israel. Now, I want to reiterate again, since there is no physical nation, there is only the hatred that is identified. So now that we've identified the physical and psychological aspects of what Amalek is, let's talk about how we could use it as a metaphor. Amalek doesn't just exist as an outside external force. We also use the events of what happened with the nation of Amalek to teach lessons about the importance of addressing our own imbalances. Essentially, this means we have the obligation to now wipe out the hatred we hold in our own hearts. Additionally, this means we need to protect ourselves from anyone who can't mitigate the hatred in theirs as well. So when the government of Gaza, when Hamas, assaults Israeli civilian women because of their ingrained generational hatred, it's appropriate for Benjamin Netanyahu to call them Amalek. And people like Tucker Carlson asking about Amalek need an answer to that, because he has a choice whether he wants to be a spokesperson for Amalek or not. And I want to point something else out here too. Well, I don't like Tucker Carlson. I don't allow my hatred to be so unmitigated that I can't give him an answer. And he deserved an answer for his question. With that said, Tucker's own hatred has led him to have some strange experiences, demonic ones. Ones so bad he claims to have woken up with blood on his sheets. And because this claim is so extreme, we will be going over this in our next video.
Culturally, it's not from a world where people are attacked by demons. And in fact, when it happened the next morning, when I saw the blood on my sheets, I was like...
Trust me, you aren't going to want to miss the video where we covered Tucker's demons. So make sure you like and subscribe, and thanks for watching, guys.